What if the events in your life are not random? What if the challenges you keep facing, the opportunities that appear and disappear, the people you attract, and even the circumstances that seem beyond your control are all responding to something deeper than you realize? Most people believe reality is something that happens to them. They believe life is a series of accidents, coincidences, and external forces beyond their influence. But Genevieve Behrend taught something radically different. She believed there is a hidden force operating behind every experience, a force so powerful that it quietly shapes the reality you live every single day. And that force is not outside of you. It begins within your own mind. The thoughts you repeatedly entertain, the images you hold, the beliefs you accept as true. These invisible mental forces may be influencing your reality far more than you have ever imagined. If you have ever wondered why certain patterns keep repeating in your life, why some things seem impossible to change, or why reality sometimes feels like it is responding to something beyond logic, stay with me, because what you are about to hear may completely change the way you understand your mind, your circumstances, and the hidden force behind your reality. Subscribe and join us as we explore the timeless wisdom of Genevieve Behrend. Now, let us begin. The mind that shapes the world. Genevieve Behrend was not a philosopher writing from the comfort of a university. She was a woman who had tested these ideas against the hard surface of real life, and she had seen them work in ways that defied ordinary explanation. She had studied under Thomas Troward, one of the most brilliant minds ever to explore the connection between mental activity and physical reality. And what she learned from him, what she proved through her own experience, changed everything she believed about the nature of existence. She discovered that the mind is not a passive receiver of experience. It is not a mirror that simply reflects what is happening around you. The mind is something far more extraordinary. It is a creative instrument, constantly broadcasting its dominant impressions outward into the fabric of reality. And whether you are aware of this or not, the process never stops. Every thought you think carries a frequency. Every image you hold in your mind has a weight to it, a kind of gravitational pull that draws corresponding experiences toward you. When Behrend began to understand this, she also began to understand why her life looked the way it did. The fears she had entertained most consistently had shaped the circumstances she kept attracting. The beliefs she held about herself determined the level of possibility she could access. This was not mysticism. Behrend was deeply careful about this distinction. She was not speaking of magic or superstition. She was speaking of a lawful process, as reliable and consistent as the laws governing electricity or gravity. The difference was that most people had never been taught to work with this law consciously. They were running the creative machinery of the mind on autopilot, producing results without understanding the mechanism behind them. The law she spoke of began with a simple but profound observation. The universe operates through a universal mind, an infinite intelligence that is always active, always responding, always moving toward expression. And within that infinite mind, your individual mind is not separate. It is a center of the same power. It draws from the same source. What differs is only the degree to which you are consciously directing that power toward a chosen end. Most people allow the current of their mental life to flow wherever habit takes it. They think the thoughts that circumstances suggest. They feel the emotions that events produce. And then they wonder why their lives seem to repeat the same patterns year after year. They are, in Behrend's language, thinking from outside in. They are letting the world dictate the content of their inner life. But the people who understand the hidden force work from the inside out. They choose the mental state first, hold it steadily, and allow the outer world to arrange itself accordingly. This does not mean that results appear instantly. It does not mean that you close your eyes and the world transforms. It means something more subtle and more powerful than that. It means that a sustained, disciplined inner life begins to attract, shape, and call forth experiences that match its dominant quality. It is a law. And like any law, it operates whether or not you believe in it. The question is not whether this force exists. The question is whether you are going to work with it or remain unconscious of it. Behrend spent her life answering that question through action. She made choices that seemed irrational to those around her, choices guided entirely by an inner conviction. And reality responded. What you believe about the nature of your own mind is perhaps the most consequential belief you hold. If you believe your mind is small, limited, and trapped by circumstance, then you will always be at the mercy of what happens around you. But if you begin to grasp what Behrend grasped, that your mind is a point of contact with an infinite creative intelligence, then something shifts. You begin to see that the hidden force behind your reality has always been available to you. It was simply waiting to be consciously engaged. The law of attraction before it had a name. Long before modern teachers began speaking about the law of attraction, Genevieve Behrend was living it, demonstrating it, and explaining its mechanics with a precision that few have matched since. She did not use that phrase. She spoke instead of mental correspondence, of the invisible matching the visible, of inner conditions producing outer conditions as naturally and inevitably as seeds produce plants. Her understanding came not from enthusiasm or wishful thinking, but from careful study and direct experience. She had read Troward deeply, and through him she had encountered a framework for understanding how consciousness and matter relate to each other. The key insight was this: matter does not produce mind. Mind produces matter. The visible world is not the cause of the invisible world. It is the effect of it. This reversal of ordinary thinking is where everything changes. When most people look at their circumstances and feel powerless, they are assuming that the outer world is primary, that what exists out there determines what is possible in here. But Behrend argued the opposite. The outer world is secondary. It is the downstream expression of the inner world. Change the inner, and in time you change the outer. She was not naive about this. She understood that the process requires patience, consistency, and a quality of mental discipline that most people have never been asked to develop. The mind that drifts with every changing mood, that entertains fear one moment and hope the next, that holds a desire today and doubts it tomorrow, produces confused and inconsistent results. This is why so many people feel as though the law is not working for them. It is working perfectly. It is simply producing results that match the mixed and inconsistent quality of their inner life. What Behrend taught was the practice of mental coherence. This means training yourself to hold a dominant inner image or state with such consistency and clarity that the creative intelligence underlying all things recognizes it as a real and chosen direction. Not as a wish. Not as a fantasy. As a definite mental fact that you are treating as already true. The mechanism she described can be understood this way. Your subconscious mind does not evaluate desires critically. It does not decide whether your goals are realistic or unrealistic, deserved or undeserved. It simply takes the most vivid and consistent impressions from your conscious mind and begins working to produce corresponding conditions. It is a builder that follows the blueprint given to it. And the blueprint is always your dominant mental state. This is why two people can face identical external circumstances and produce completely different results. One holds an inner image of limitation, of scarcity, of being unable. The other holds an inner image of possibility, of movement, of things coming together. Both minds are drawing from the same universal source. But the instructions they are giving to that source are entirely different. Behrend had seen this in her own life with startling clarity. When she decided to travel to England to study with Troward, she had almost nothing in financial terms. The cost of the journey was many times what she possessed. And yet she held the intention with such steady conviction that the means appeared in ways she could not have predicted or arranged. She did not wait until she had the money to decide she would go. She decided she would go, and then the money followed the decision. This is the sequence that most people have backward. They say, when the conditions are right, I will feel confident. When I have the resources, I will take action. When the outer world gives me permission, I will believe. But the law works in the other direction. The inner state must come first. The confidence, the clarity, the conviction, all of these must precede the evidence. And when they do, the evidence has a way of appearing. This is not always comfortable. It asks you to stand in faith before you can stand in proof. But Behrend shows us, through her own remarkable life, that this is precisely how the hidden force operates. The picture in your mind. There is one practice that Genevieve Behrend returned to again and again in her teaching. It sits at the center of everything she understood about how the mind communicates with the creative power of the universe. She called it mental picturing, and she considered it the most direct and effective tool available to anyone who wished to deliberately shape their reality. The idea is simple in its description but profound in its implications. The mind thinks in images. Before anything is spoken, before anything is written, before any action is taken, there is first a picture. An architect sees the building before the foundation is laid. A musician hears the melody before a single note is played. A person who transforms their life sees the transformed version of that life before the transformation has occurred. The image precedes the manifestation. Always. Behrend taught that most people carry mental pictures they have never consciously chosen. They picture themselves struggling because they have been struggling. They picture their relationships as strained because their relationships have been strained. They picture their finances as tight because their finances have been tight. And because the creative mechanism of the mind faithfully produces what the imagination consistently holds, they keep producing more of what they have already been experiencing. The practice of deliberate mental picturing is the act of interrupting this automatic cycle. It is the decision to choose a new image and to hold that image with enough clarity and emotional conviction that the creative intelligence begins treating it as a true directive rather than an idle thought. But Behrend was specific about what made this practice effective and what caused it to fail. The image must be held with a relaxed, trusting quality. It must be approached not with desperate grasping, but with the calm certainty of someone who knows that what they are seeing is already on its way. The grasping mind is a contracted mind. And a contracted mind interferes with the very flow it is trying to direct. She described this in terms of the difference between a demand and a recognition. Many people approach their desires as demands they are making of the universe, as if they must somehow force reality to comply. But Behrend taught something different. She taught that the power is not something you force. It is something you recognize as already working in your favor. The mental picture is not a command. It is an alignment. It is the act of tuning your inner life to the frequency of what you desire, so that you become a natural receiver and expression of it. This distinction matters enormously in practice. When you hold your desired image with a sense of demand or urgency, you are actually broadcasting a signal of lack. The urgency itself is a form of belief in absence. But when you hold the image with a sense of quiet recognition, with a feeling of already belonging to the reality you are picturing, you are broadcasting a very different signal. You are broadcasting correspondence. And correspondence is what the creative intelligence responds to. The practice Behrend recommended was simple in form. Each day, find a period of stillness. In that stillness, form the clearest possible picture of the condition you wish to bring into your life. See it in detail. Feel the reality of it. Allow your emotions to respond to the picture as they would respond to something actually present. And then release it. Not with doubt, but with trust. With a settled confidence that the intelligence now working within that image is already moving it toward expression. She had seen this work in areas as concrete as finances, health, relationships, and opportunity. She was not speaking abstractly. She was reporting what she had observed repeatedly in her own life and in the lives of those she taught. The picture in the mind is not separate from the reality in the world. They are connected by a law that operates with absolute consistency. When the image is clear, sustained, and held in the right quality of mind, it moves toward form. This is not poetry. This is the mechanics of a hidden force that most people never learn to consciously operate. Fear, faith, and the direction of power. Genevieve Behrend understood something about fear that most people spend their entire lives not grasping. Fear is not the opposite of the creative power. It is the same creative power, pointed in the wrong direction. This is why fear is so effective at producing what you do not want. It uses the exact same mechanism that faith uses to produce what you do want. The mechanism is not partial. It does not discriminate. It moves with equal faithfulness toward whatever you hold most consistently in your imagination. This insight has profound consequences for the way you relate to your own inner life. It means that the person who spends their days picturing worst-case scenarios is not simply being cautious or realistic. They are actively engaged in creation. They are giving the creative intelligence of the universe a detailed and emotionally charged blueprint, and the creative intelligence is responding accordingly. Fear, held consistently and vividly, is a form of prayer. It is a form of instruction, and it is heard. Behrend spoke about this not to produce anxiety, but to produce clarity. If the mechanism works as well in the direction of fear as it does in the direction of faith, then the direction you choose becomes the most important decision of your inner life. And direction is a choice. Not always an easy choice. Not always one that can be made once and held forever without effort. But a choice nonetheless. The person who has practiced fear for a long time, who has trained themselves through years of anxious thinking to expect difficulty, to anticipate loss, to brace for disappointment, has developed a powerful mental habit. And mental habits do not dissolve simply because you understand them intellectually. They must be replaced through consistent practice. A new habit of thinking must be cultivated with the same patience and persistence that you would bring to developing any skill. This is where faith enters the picture. But Behrend's understanding of faith was very different from the passive, waiting kind of faith that is sometimes described. She did not mean belief in something you hope might happen. She meant an active, engaged, deliberate orientation of the mind toward what is desired, maintained in the face of whatever evidence the present moment offers. This is a demanding practice. It asks you to hold an image of health when the body is struggling. It asks you to hold an image of abundance when the account is depleted. It asks you to hold an image of resolution when the conflict is at its peak. And this is precisely where most people abandon the practice. When the outer world contradicts the inner image, the natural impulse is to let the outer world win. To say, this is not working. This is not real. I was fooling myself. And in that moment of abandonment, the creative momentum that had been building dissolves. The old pattern reasserts itself. And the person concludes that the law does not work, when in fact they simply did not hold the image long enough for it to reach expression. Behrend herself had faced this test. There were moments in her own journey when the outer circumstances gave her every reason to turn back, to abandon the inner conviction she had been holding, to accept the verdict of visible reality. But she had learned enough of the law to know that the outer world always lags behind the inner world. There is always a gap between the time you plant and the time you harvest. That gap is where faith is tested. And faith, consistently maintained through that gap, is what determines the outcome. She described the relationship between fear and faith as a kind of tug-of-war happening inside the mind at every moment. Both are pulling at the creative machinery. What you feed grows stronger. What you starve grows weaker. Every time you deliberately redirect your attention from fear to faith, from the image of what you dread to the image of what you desire, you are shifting the weight of the creative power. Not dramatically, not all at once, but consistently, step by step, the direction of the power begins to change. And as it changes, so does the reality it produces. Receiving what you have already claimed. One of the most overlooked aspects of Genevieve Behrend's teaching is what might be called the art of receptivity. She did not simply teach people how to desire and how to picture. She taught them how to receive. And she recognized that receiving is a skill just as much as imagining, and one that requires just as much development. The problem, as she observed it, was this: most people do not actually believe they deserve what they desire. They want it. They can picture it. But underneath the wanting and the picturing, there is a quiet and persistent belief that it is not truly meant for them. That others might receive such things, but not them specifically. This belief does not usually announce itself openly. It hides inside feelings of unworthiness, inside self-criticism, inside the habit of making yourself smaller than circumstances require, inside the tendency to deflect compliments, to distrust good news, to wait for the other shoe to drop when things are going well. Behrend was clear that this inner resistance is not a minor obstacle. It is the central obstacle. You can hold the clearest picture in the world, but if there is a deep current of belief running beneath it that says this is not for me, that current will quietly and effectively cancel the work you are doing on the surface. The mind operates on multiple levels simultaneously. And when those levels are in conflict, it is almost always the deeper, quieter belief that prevails. The work of becoming a receiver, then, involves more than visualization. It involves examining the beliefs that sit beneath the surface. It involves asking yourself honestly, do I actually believe this is possible for me? Not possible in theory. Not possible for someone else. Possible for me, specifically, given who I am and where I am and what I have done and not done. And if the honest answer is no, then that is where the real work begins. Behrend spoke of this in terms of expanding your sense of identity. The self you currently believe yourself to be has a ceiling. That ceiling is not imposed by the universe. It is constructed by the accumulated weight of past experience, past conclusions, past stories you have told yourself about your own limitations. But the self that exists at the level of universal mind has no such ceiling. It is connected to an intelligence that is, by nature, unlimited. The work is always to identify more with that deeper self than with a small self that history has built. She described a quality she called receptive expectancy. This is not the same as wishful hoping, which carries an undertone of doubt. Receptive expectancy is the settled, open quality of a person who knows something is coming and is simply making space for it. It is the posture of someone who has planted seeds and is living in the calm certainty that growth is occurring, even while the surface of the ground still shows nothing. They are not anxious. They are not forcing. They are not checking the soil every hour to see if the sprout has appeared. They are trusting the process that they know is already underway. This quality of open, trusting readiness actually creates the conditions for faster manifestation. Because it is free from the interference of doubt and anxiety, it allows the creative intelligence to work without resistance. The person who is grasping creates friction. The person who is trusting creates flow. And in that flow, things arrive that could not arrive under the contracted conditions of desperation. Behrend also taught something that is easy to miss but critical. You must be willing to act on what comes. Receptivity is not passivity. The creative intelligence does not typically deliver your desires fully formed and requiring nothing of you. It opens doors. It creates opportunities. It arranges circumstances. But you must walk through the door. You must recognize the opportunity. You must show up for the circumstances. The hidden force is always working. But it works through action as much as through intention. The one who receives is the one who has prepared themselves inwardly to recognize and act upon what life is offering. Living from the inside out. Everything Genevieve Behrend taught pointed toward a single transformation in the way a person relates to their own life. Not a technique. Not a system. A fundamental shift in orientation. The shift from living outside in to living inside out. From being driven by circumstances to being directed by consciousness. From reacting to the world to creating within it. This shift does not happen all at once. It is not a single moment of decision that permanently alters the course of a life. It is a daily, sometimes hourly, practice of choosing the inner state first. Of asking not what is happening out there, but what is alive in here. Of recognizing that the invisible always precedes the visible, and therefore the only truly productive work is the work done in the invisible dimension of the mind. Behrend spent decades living this way and teaching others to do the same. And what she observed, consistently, was that the people who made this shift changed not only their outer circumstances but their inner experience of being alive. They moved from a posture of waiting, hoping, and fearing to a posture of expecting, creating, and trusting. And from that posture, the world looked different. Not because the world had changed, but because the way they were meeting the world had changed. And gradually, the world itself began to respond. She understood that this was not always easy to communicate because it requires a different way of relating to cause and effect than most people are accustomed to. The conventional view says, things happen, and then I respond, and my life is shaped by how well I respond to what happens. Behrend's view says, the state I consistently hold inwardly is the primary cause, and the things that happen are among the effects of that cause. I am not simply responding to a world that exists independently of me. I am, at a level I am only beginning to understand, participating in the production of the world I experience. This is a confronting idea. It asks you to take full responsibility for your inner life in a way that has no exceptions and no excuses. You cannot blame circumstances entirely when you understand that consciousness shapes circumstances. You cannot locate the source of your limitations entirely outside yourself when you understand that the mind is a creative force. This responsibility can feel heavy. But Behrend experienced it, and taught, that this same responsibility is also the greatest freedom you will ever know. Because if your inner world is truly the primary cause of your outer world, then by changing your inner world, you change everything. She described the ideal state as one of perpetual creative engagement. Not the frantic, effortful engagement of someone who is forcing results, but the calm, confident engagement of someone who knows that they are always in relationship with an intelligence that is always working on their behalf. Someone who holds their desires lightly enough to trust the process, and firmly enough to maintain the direction. Someone who has made peace with the gap between planting and harvesting, and who fills that gap not with anxiety but with continued, faithful inner work. The hidden force that Behrend pointed to her entire life is not distant. It is not reserved for the spiritually advanced or the naturally gifted. It is available to every person who is willing to do the quiet, disciplined, and often invisible work of attending to their own inner life with honesty and intention. It asks only that you stop treating your mind as a mirror and begin treating it as a lamp. That you stop taking your cues from what the world shows you and begin showing the world what you have chosen to create. Genevieve Behrend did not discover a secret. She demonstrated a law. And laws are available to everyone who is willing to understand and work with them. The question she leaves us with is not whether this force exists. The question is whether you are ready to become conscious of it, to direct it deliberately, and to live from the extraordinary creative power that has always been at the center of your being. If you enjoyed this topic and want to receive more videos like this, subscribe to the channel now and become part of this community. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.